everybody, and welcome to the third episode of the Your Story, Our Fight podcast. We hope you've been enjoying the podcast and want you to reach out to us. Let us know how you're enjoying it. You can visit us on all our social media channels or lupusla.org. I am super excited to introduce you to our guest today. Dr. Monica Blied is a clinical psychologist and a lupus patient who treats lupus patients. So it's a really interesting dynamic there that we're going to hear about today. So welcome, Dr. Blied.
Thank you so much for having me. I am thrilled to be a part of this podcast today.
Excellent. So your lupus journey, I'm assuming your professional journey started before your lupus journey. Is that accurate or about similar?
No, actually. So I was diagnosed with lupus during my second year of grad school. So before I had figured out what I wanted to specialize in clinical psychology, I knew that I wanted to do something in this service field, but not exactly what. And so it was actually like over the course of my journey and navigating my own diagnosis and helping other folks. At that time, I was working clinically with people living with HIV and AIDS and other, mental and physical health conditions that I realized like, wow, this is really special and something that I wish there were more of. So
yeah. Did the lupus diagnosis really then led your thinking on in terms of your career?
Eventually. Okay. I think in the beginning, there was still a lot of questions, a lot of anxiety and sadness and depression and shame. And it took a while, 7 years, 8 years.
So tell me about the shame, because I think that's interesting because I haven't heard that word used with a lupus diagnosis, but I anxiety, sure, fear, absolutely. I think we should talk about that too, but I think it's interesting that you use the word shame. Where did that come from?
Yeah, kind of surprising to me as well. I think growing up in the Christian community and in a Christian family, to have a chronic illness, what I was told, which of course I found out through my own study and faith searching, was absolutely incorrect. But what I was told was if I just had enough faith, that God would heal me. And if I'm still living with lupus, then obviously I'm not doing something right, like not praying enough, not being faithful enough, and those kinds of things. So, of course, along with that came a lot of shame and questioning and, wondering like, well, what does that mean about my faith? Like, does God not love me? Is God punishing me? And all those things came up. And it was really fortunate of me that while at the time I was diagnosed, I was also in seminary. So I completed my doctorate in clinical psychology at Fuller Theological Seminary. So I was taking like theology courses and psychology
best of both worlds,
courses, right?
Right.
So during my theology courses, I just used my papers to try to figure this shit out. Like, oh, I'm a Christian who curses.
That's okay. You go ahead.
Because just trying to figure out like, suffering, and outside of me, but then also the clients that I was seeing in clinical care, like who love God, but are totally rejected by their church family because they're living with HIV. And all of a sudden, folks don't want to touch their hand or, all these other things, the stigma associated with a transmittable disease. And so I thought about suffering. I thought about like, the meaning and purpose of it and how can a loving God allow this to happen? Just in our world, there's so much suffering going on. And what does this mean? About my faith, what does this say? Was my family member right in saying that like, oh, I just need to pray more, or was there something else? So I used that time to really dive deep. And I had this like faith shattering experience because I had to dismantle the faith that I had and what I was brought up to believe and reconstruct something that was a lot more healthy. And I think actually a lot more true to life, to what the Bible actually says.
Now, did you have a particular professor or somebody, like did you feel like you needed permission from the school or a teacher or somebody or a priest or somebody that sort of led you in that direction? or confirmed what you were thinking?
Well, it was actually just like, I don't want to sound nerdy, like scholarly study, like what have
Right,
other
right, right.
folks said about it, about what is the meaning of suffering. I did have, a couple different professors and mentors that gave me guidance and helped me to find like a broader perspective. So one
Mhm.
was Dr. Tama Bryant Davis. She was not at Fuller, but I did my master's at Pepperdine, and she was my
Right.
mentor from Pepperdine. And so that summer after I was diagnosed, she actually had assigned, well, not assigned, but voluntold me, offered me
Encouraged.
the opportunity to write a book chapter about Black women's physical health and the church, and how the church hasn't responded to Black women having the highest rates of breast cancer and
Hmm.
HIV and diabetes and those kinds of things. And so it was through that study that I also like, oh, lupus, by the way, but also like, what is the church doing or not doing? And, what can we do differently? And the second professor was Jeff Bjork, Dr. Jeff Bjork at Fuller, who has all these amazing quotes. He just retired last year, and one of them was embrace your limits as God's gifts.
Hmm.
And that is something that I still hold on to today, of like the limits that lupus puts on my body is
Mhm.
actually a gift. It's actually a blessing. So I
Interesting.
told you, like, before we started recording, like, I just woke up like 2 hours ago. I took a 3.5 hour nap, because my body was tired, and because I didn't
Yeah.
have clients today, and because I wanted to have enough energy for this podcast. And some might see that as a weakness or unproductivity or whatever the case might be. But it's actually a gift that I have the need to rest. And I think I'm going
Mhm.
to live a whole lot longer because of it, because I'm honoring my body and listening to its signals.
Yeah, I always had that when I was first diagnosed. I was 16 and I was in high school and college and so on. And so I sort of made it my mission never to nap and never to, never to do that. Cause I just was I'm not going to let the lupus win over me in that way, was sort of my mentality. And I'm not generally a napper anyway, but now I recognize that if my body needs that, but that takes a long time to get to that, because there is so much societal pressure and, what do you mean you woke up at 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock? And, I have 2 kids right now. So 2 young kids right now. So that waking up at 10 o'clock is never going to happen. But
Yeah, yeah. I have little ones too. And, thank God for help.
right. Yes, sure.
Yeah, yeah. So how long did it take you then to like figure out that that was not the way to go?
It's interesting. I think it's an evolving process. And I think it's just a matter of, because for me, it's not even about the rest. It's about knowing my limitations and knowing what sort of sets me off. And I'm still learning that. I think it's different realizations at different points in your life. But I think the one thing, since you treat so many lupus patients, it's interesting. I'll be interested to hear if you agree with me, but I think knowing your body as a lupus patient, you really become super in tune with your own body. And I think to a certain extent, more in tune than you probably want to be or should be. So every little thing can sort of trigger you and set you off into um, an anxiety situation or a fear situation, and I think that can sometimes make you more ill or exacerbate your symptoms. And I think, it's really been more of a discovery I've made in the last, I always knew I was super aware of my body, but in terms of how that mind-body connection then turns that into a negative aspect of my illness, that's a relatively new discovery for me.
Lupus LA is excited to be hosting our second annual virtual dinner party experience with top chef Antonia Lafazo on February 27th. Please visit lupusla.org for more information.
for a lot of people, like you described, it's kind of like waves in the ocean. It kind of comes and goes, where sometimes you get like a riptide and you're just pulled into like, okay, I understand that I need this right now. And other times it's like, nah, I think I'm going to fight against it. Just swim against the current and see what happens, and get slapped in the face a couple times before you realize like, yeah, you need to go ahead and take that nap. You mentioned about anxiety. When we have this body awareness, how that can show up in our thoughts, and thoughts that tell us like, oh no, is this the next, major flare up, or I'm never going to get better, or I'm too young. This was one of my early thoughts. I'm too young to have to take medication for the rest of my life. This is not fair. Yeah. Those kinds of things. And with the mind-body health connection, what you say to yourself is going to impact your disease state. We look at it with cognitive behavioral therapy, the relationship between our thoughts, what we tell ourselves, and what shows up in our emotions and our mood, and then what shows up in our behaviors and in our bodies. And it's all connected. And I wouldn't say the simplest way, but the most well-researched way, I guess, to intervene in that crazy cycle is by shifting your thoughts. But then also, like, there's some body stuff that you can do too. I'm a holistic practitioner. And so I teach about like, okay, well, examine the evidence for that thought. Like, how realistic is that? Is it 100% realistic? That's number one. Number two, is it helpful? And can you say yes, 100%? And if you cannot say yes 100% to, is it realistic and is it helpful, then it's time to challenge that thought and reframe it of, okay, what can I tell myself differently?
What's the delivery method for that? Is it meditation? Is it yoga? Is it, or is it just simply saying, nope, I'm not going to think that way. I'm going to think the other way?
Ooh, it's a variety, and it's client-centered. So basically, whatever the client needs. So it starts with that, right? That's trying to get rid of stinking thinking or manage cognitive distortions is one part, but then also being mindful to what's happening in your body and starting to manage that is also another major component. So that looks like you said, that meditation piece, that yoga. I'm a certified chair yoga instructor. So just some physical movements. Sometimes it looks like thought stopping, which is another cognitive strategy, which is like visualizing in your mind a stop sign and saying like, stop that. And then, shifting your thoughts to something that is pleasant or at least neutral. And then if that doesn't work, just doing the stop sign, sometimes we need aversive conditioning. So that might be like having a little rubber band on your wrist and popping that rubber band every time you keep thinking, right? But then also we actually want to respect and honor the fact that sometimes our minds do have a lot of anxieties and worries and those kinds of things. And we don't want to stuff that, because then that can show up in our body as well. Higher blood pressure, lower immunity, poor sleep, those kinds of side effects. So you can schedule worry time each day to give yourself that sacrosanct time.
That I had not heard about.
Right. When I tell my clients that, it's like I have this brain picture behind me. They're like mind like, wait, what? Like, you want me to worry? I'm like, look.
So what do you do? What do you do during worry time? I mean, obviously I think that would set me over the edge.
Yes. Well, look, you're gonna do it anyway, right? You're going to worry. We are going to worry, whether that be because of too high of the GABA neurochemical or too low of serotonin or whatever is going on, a lot of, stressors in your life. What I'm assigning folks to do is schedule 30 minutes to an hour most during the middle of the day where you sit down and you allow yourself to worry. Whatever the planning, the problem solving, all the stressors, just think about it, journal it is really helpful. When you're writing, you're actually getting it out of your brain, dumping it so that your mind doesn't have to hold on to it and try to process it. So it stops showing up in your dreams and in your, sleep and those kinds of things. And then outside of the worry time, you do that thought stopping that we just talked about. Like, nope, that has to wait until worry time, or that has to wait until tomorrow's worry time. And so the brain feels safe and more at ease to be able to think about other things because it knows it has this circumscribed time to worry.
Hmm. That's really interesting because I think that's I think the fear that a lot of lupus patients have is that once you get that ball rolling, it's hard to stop that, you know, and it's hard to let it not snowball into a bigger, you know, for my sort of anxieties started more with issues with my heart rhythm.
Okay.
And so then it sort of perpetuated to making it worse and worse, you know, and I think it's taken me a while to get that under control. But I think the worry time is an interesting sort of the opposite of serenity all the time and that kind of thing, you know, because that can be difficult too, especially in the fast moving world we have.
Absolutely. It's a paradoxical intervention. And you know, it's awesome that you mentioned about the worrying about your heart rhythm, because one of the brain body based interventions is heart rate variability biofeedback. And so in addition to like mindfulness and meditation and breath work or yoga, you can also do biofeedback, which combines all that and teaches about the slow belly breath or the diaphragmatic breath, but also gives you feedback or information about your biology. What is going on with the variability between heartbeats for you, and being able to see that and through your breath control it. So you're controlling your vagal nerve functioning, you're controlling your parasympathetic nervous system functioning, increasing that so that you're training your brain and your body to become more relaxed. And when you're in that more relaxed state, when you're activating your parasympathetic nervous system, you're actually going to increase your immunity. You're going to decrease, you know, levels of stress, obviously, but then also, you know, cortisol in your body and other things that can really wreak havoc on folks who are living with lupus.
Lupus LA's Facebook Live chat series connects leading lupus and health experts with our community to answer the most current and important questions. Collectively, these chats have been viewed over 80,000 times since March 2020. For more information, visit lupusla.org.
Got it. All right. Well, before this turns into a full-on therapy session for me personally, I gotta hear more about your lupus and sort of what were your physical limitations. What happened to you, especially during such a, I would say, high stress time in your life when you're in grad school, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, it was during grad school, but then I also had a lot of personal things going on in my family. And, you know, with the stress diathesis model, sometimes like it just takes that certain amount of stress to turn on that gene.
Yep.
And for me, what it looked like early on was a lot of fatigue and like joint pain and stuff like that. I didn't really pay attention to the pain too much, but definitely a lot of fatigue. So I actually thought that I had diabetes at first. Because I have a family history of diabetes, and it seemed like I would be really tired and then I would eat and I would be okay, but then I would eat like a certain amount or a certain food and then I'd fall asleep for like 4 hours. So I'm like, something's going on with my blood sugar. I don't know what's happening. And so went and, you know, got checked out, and I had some just really on top of it physicians who went to a hematologist first, who then referred me to a rheumatologist who said, like, I think you might have like an early lupus, but, you know, let's just monitor it and see. And I feel very blessed that like within the first year or so of having symptoms, I was diagnosed.
That's rare. I mean, that's
very
really
rare.
I had that same luck, but it's, you don't hear that very often at all.
It's usually 5-10 years, you know, because it's such a sinister disease where, you know, the symptoms wax and wane and they look different for each person. And the science is, you know, coming out with, you know, better explanations and all that. Right. So I feel really fortunate. And after, you know, there was like, oh, maybe it's an early lupus. I was like, I rebuke thee, get thee behind me. And I fired my doctor. I was like,
no.
That is not.
Have you made up?
And so I dropped out of medical care for like 6 months. And of course, my symptoms continued and worsened. And I just found a different physician in a whole different city. Like, I was like, no, I don't have any medical records, just like completely showing up as
Start from scratch.
Right. And this new physician, she had looked at my my lab results, and she was like, do you have lupus?
So you got 2 quick diagnoses within a year. That's impressive.
Right? I was like, no, but I guess I do.
Right.
And I went to my car and I cried for like over half an hour and called my mom because I was, how old was I? Like 24, 25 at the time. I was a single mom at the time. And I was just like, complete woe is me, pity party all the way, not really knowing what this disease was or what to do about it. And so like, of course, I, consulted with Dr. Google, and Dr. Google told me like,
Dangerous.
right. Dr. Google told me like, this is a disease that's like, progressive and debilitating. And, eventually you'll, lose the ability to walk and you'll die. And I was like, oh no, just thinking the very worst, of course. And it was at that time that I found Juana and Estella with the Looms for Lupus support group.
Yeah.
And I attended.
Juana was our first guest on this show.
Oh, wonderful. Yes. So this was like almost 9 years ago. And I went to their support group, and it's super cool because you're sitting there, well, pre-COVID, you're sitting there like looming. So doing this thing with your hands that is arthritis friendly, and keeping yourself busy by just, and also sitting and listening. And they had it at Kaiser where there would be like medical professionals talking and also a mental health professional. And I had the chance to sit at a table with women who were living with lupus for 20 years, living with lupus for 25, 30 years, some that were diagnosed a lot later than me and had major complications. And I had so much gratitude and so much more of an understanding of what this disease is and what it could look like. And more than that, how to manage it on my own. So when I went into private practice, years later, post-graduation, postdoc and all that, and thought about like, okay, well, what kind of client do I want to see? What kind of population do I want to serve? I thought back to that vulnerable place that I was in, and how can I give back? How can I help people who are feeling really disarmed and vulnerable and scared, and help them kind of navigate their way to living their best life, even with this disease.
Yeah, I mean, I think lupus really strikes in that tricky part of life for, 90% of the people are women. So in that tricky part of life. And I think when you hear chronic illness, it's just that alone, I think, is really hard to deal with. And I think, if you hear a specific kind of cancer, you can say, okay, here's how I beat it. Here's how I get to the finish line. Right. And with lupus at the moment, there's just no finish line. And I think that's really, and I'm sure, I mean, your experience must be really valuable to your patients. I mean, how much of that really comes in to your treatment of your patients is your experience?
I mean, again, it's client-centered, so as much as they need. But sometimes when my clients are like, oh my gosh, X, Y, and Z, I'm like, oh, I get it. And sometimes it's like, here's what's worked for me, here's what's worked for other clients. And then sometimes it's just, that validation and commiserating, like, yes, this is what the reality is. How can we move towards acceptance successfully? Where, yes, this is a part of your life, but this is not who you are, and this does not define you. How can we still find meaning and purpose and sweetness in the breath that you still have and the opportunity that you still have to show up in this world?
Yeah, and I mean, I think what I think is really nice about this kind of treatment, and especially the yoga and the things like acupuncture and mind-body connection is I'm noticing a lot of the rheumatologists are getting more on board with this. Has that made it, have you seen a change in that in the last, since you've been a lupus patient?
Yes. Actually, my doctor, Dr. Sammy Matias, when he found out that I was doing private practice and biofeedback, he was like, I'll send you all my patients.
That's great.
Hold on, I'm full. But yeah, and I love that because there's I don't want to use something like grotesque, like more than one way to skin a cat. There's a more eloquent way to say it, but the long and short of it is that when we think about our mind, what's going on in our mental health, and we think about our medical health in our body, like it's all connected. What shows up in our brain shows up in our body. What shows up in our body shows up in our brain. And so if you can do something like meditation or like, EMDR for trauma treatment or brain spotting, or taking a breath, taking a walk, paying attention to the brain gut connection. So what is your nutrition? What are you feeding your gut? Do you have a healthy microbiome? Because that affects our immune system as well. Like all of it is connected.
That's the hard part. That one's the tricky part.
Yeah, it's hard and it's tricky, but it's not impossible. And I'm the first one that's like, I can reach from where I am and pull out a bag of chocolate almonds. Like, I'm like, not the best, but it's all about like just being, conscious of what we're feeding our temple, and then like just making better choices in small ways. You don't have to go to 100% plant-based in order to live a healthy life. Kudos to those who can. Like, I love bacon, so it's going to be really hard for me.
Me too. Yeah, I would be starved to death in 3 days. That would be the end of it.
Right. But it's like, okay, so what can I do?
Right.
Like, okay, I can, switch to almond milk, or I can, whatever the case might be.
Right. So you really guide your patients on sort of the full picture of their health,
right?
As opposed to just one individual, and I think everybody needs that in their treatment plan, we all have these lists of how many doctors we see. And I think a lot of lupus patients miss this part of it, which really ties everything together. And I think that's, I think it could be so valuable to patients.
Absolutely. I had a client last week who was kind of just feeling down in the dumps. And normally she has awesome coping skills as far as, going for walks and, spending time with friends and journaling and meditating and those kinds of things. But she had a lot of stressors. And I was like, okay, let's go for a walk. She was like, right now? I'm like, yeah, I'm on your cell phone. Let's go. And so that behavior activation, keeping in mind the law of inertia, like things in motion, stay in motion, things at rest, stay at rest, unless there's an outside force that acts upon it. And just starting is the hardest part. So if I can be there as the psychologist on the other line and saying like, get up and walk, or drop and give me, 20 sit-ups or whatever the case might be. And that's like, but what it does is it like, it drives up those endorphins, those, happy chemicals, the dopamine, pleasure, reward center, but then also something called BDNF, brain-derived neurotropic factor, is a protein that is released when you exercise, when you have some physical movement that causes like a heart rate increase. And that actually binds around the cells that were damaged by stress, helping to heal your body from the inside. So when I talk about like whole health interventions, it's really all inclusive.
All right. Give me an example of when a lupus patient that you're treating has really, in effect, treated you.
Ooh. Oh my gosh. Where's my cell phone? So I feel like, sometimes, I'm fortunate to kind of, drop gems as far as having these, helpful pieces of advice that come from various parts of psychology or lived experience or whatever. But oftentimes my clients will drop gems on me, and I've actually started to keep notes on it, because I'm going to write a book or make a course or something like that that has all these included. So there's going to be like a online course with a session for each of these gems. And so
all right, I want you to drop a couple for us.
Okay, I'll read you a couple of them. So one said, I'm investing my time in a self-love lifestyle. Yeah,
I like that.
Yes, my lifestyle is self-love. Another one said, very few people will pay full price for something that's offered to them on discounts.
All right.
And that's true. Talking about like dating advice. And I was like,
yeah.
Yes. Someone said, don't cry because it happened. Smile because it's over.
I like that. We can all think about that right now, right?
Smile because, you know, you learned something from it. And this person was like, smile because it's over. Like you made it through. And then another one, don't pray to God like he's on a budget. I was like,
that's a good one. I like that one. That one resonates.
Because of our human limitations, sometimes we try to limit, you know, those around us or, you know, our higher power. But really, it's just like, imagine if like, that wasn't the case. Imagine that, you know, you can believe in abundance and that will come to you. Even if it looks different than what you expect. What you expect is to go to the doctor and say like, oh, you're cured from lupus. But really what you end up getting or manifesting is like, oh, my life is so much more full because now I'm more mindful and I pay attention to how the trees look as I'm driving, or the laughter of children inside my household or while I'm walking through the park, and those kinds of things. You are more full because of the beauty of, you know, what this illness does give to us.
Wow. Yeah, I think that resonates a lot. All right, tell me what's next for you. What are you tackling? What's going to be? What's on the agenda?
Yeah, well, who knows? My goal is to find more balance. So work less. I think oftentimes when you ask that question, people are like, oh, I'm gonna, you know, work more and do all these other things. Like, I actually want to work less and pay better attention to my body and just honoring its limitations. I think that, you know, the way that my personality is set up and the way that our society and our culture says like, you know, busyness is productive, it's really hard to be countercultural. And so I'm trying to put that into practice. And like I mentioned, I am developing courses that'll be available online for folks to sign up and learn about mind-body health, learn about, you know, mindfulness interventions and stress management strategies. And by developing these courses and making them available, it will give me the ability to also work less. So it all kind of
excellent. It all ties together and then be wrapped up in a book of gems.
Yeah,
call that right. We got to have the book of gems because I think that's going to resonate with a lot of people, especially in our society now where everything's sort of, you know, in a tweet or in a, you know, that can really make a big impact on people. So, well, this is great. Thank you so much for joining us. I know you're newly involved with Lupus LA, and I know we're going to have a lot of interaction together. And so our audience is really going to, I think, grow to get to see a lot of you. And I think that's great for everybody. So thanks so much for joining us. And we'll look forward to the next gem.
Thank you so much, Adam. I appreciate it.
On behalf of the entire team at Lupus LA, we thank you for joining the Your Story, Our Fight podcast. Please tune in, spread the word, and come back for more inspiring lupus stories. I'm your host, Adam Selkowitz, wishing you good health, and to always remember, your story is our fight.